there was so much talent concentrated there, and it's like all and I'm just wondering when I'm reading it. So a lot of them come out of the University of Illinois.
Hmm.
Max Levchin and Nozek comes from University of Illinois, right? And then one or two other
The
guys, and you
YouTube
think,
the YouTube founders do as well. Two out of the three YouTube co-founders come from the University of Illinois
yeah, and
as
that
well,
makes you
and
think. I
The,
mean,
the Yelp founders, actually, the Yelp
mm,
co-founders come from who are PayPal alumni, come from UIUC.
yeah. So I mean, I was thinking like, I'm sure it's a good program, but like, how does the University of Illinois just produce like, all these like brilliant people who go on to have such a mark on the world? Do you think it's just like, it's just sort of there was just a synergy there that worked, because it's unlikely that like, they happen to have the four or five, best programmers or some of the best programmers right there as
Right.
undergrads at the computer science program. There had to be a little more. So it had to be talent, but it also had to just be a timing thing and being at the right place and right time. And it has to be, I think, probably there's maybe like a few people. Like I think if my impression from the book, and I don't know anything, you would have a better idea of this. It was really Max was sort of the genius force and the driving and like the creative force that just bringing the University of Illinois people. Not saying that they were not talented in their own right, but he was the one who really sort of was the catalyst for everything that happened from there. Is that your idea, or how do you think about sort of the
Yeah.
role of talent and the role of just timing and synergy and all those other things?
Right. No, this is a fun one to unpack on several levels, and I'm glad you mentioned the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. It is one of the underrated components of this particular story, this generation of entrepreneurs. And it's one of the things that someone I interviewed very early said, look, everyone thinks of this as a Stanford story or as a West Coast story. They
Yeah.
miss the fact that so much of our engineering talent actually came out of like the, Champaign-Urbana. So I went back and like I, went to the campus. I looked through old historical documents that were published by the Department of Computer Science in the 90s. But if let's take UIUC, like stay on this beat for a second, because UIUC's contribution to computing like extends for decades, right? From the 40s, 50s, 60s. This is the combination of war funding of naval departments that are based there, or other things that that happen there. They build some of the world's first digital computers. They build some of the world's first social networks. So by the time young immigrant Max Levchin arrives at UIUC, the pump is primed. Like this place has been a real generative center for computing. The other part of it is Mark Andreessen has built the Mosaic browser, has left UIUC, built Netscape. It's gone public. He's on the cover of Time magazine.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all of these people have something of a roadmap. Like, hey, I had someone tell me like, that guy was in the dorms. Like, he ate burgers at that place. I eat burgers at that place too. Like,
Yeah.
what a remarkable thing. So you have this person who sets the course for what you could do with computer code. He is hugely successful, and it's like the starting gun. And part of what happens is, Jawed Karim, who is the later co-founder of YouTube, early PayPal, said to me, he said, I came to UIUC because of Mark Andreessen.
Uh,
So you have a collection of talent. Now, part of what's happening is the money and the kind of the company creation is happening on the West Coast. So before Max, several of the people who are early in this story as either board members or later employees move out to the West Coast and start to they join Netscape, right? Or they start to go to meetups, or they join startups, or they do whatever they're going to do. Max is one of those people. He leaves, and understandably, the first people he calls, because he can hire no one because the talent market is so tight, he calls his friends from University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana and says, hey, we did a lot of coding projects. I respect and admire you. Could you come out here? A little bit of convincing later, that first seed group joins him there. It's a natural pipeline driven not by any grand theories about recruiting. It's actually just driven by the fact that like no one else would work for them. So the internet is on fire. Are you going to go to work for like a much better funded startup, or are you going to go work with this guy Max who has $100,000 from this guy Peter, right? Who maybe they have an idea around mobile security and payments. You're not going to do that. You're going to go work for Google, right? You're going to go work for. In fact, I interviewed this woman who was early at Confinity, which is the company that Peter and Max created. And she admitted herself, she's like, I wasn't a good fit for me. And the company that she leaves for is Google. And this is like early days of, still relatively early days of Google. So my joke was like, well, I guess it all worked out. And she was like, yes, it did. So they're in an asymmetric sort of battle for talent at a time when anybody else can kind of outcompete them. And Max has friends and contacts at UIUC, and they recruit heavily from UIC. Your broader question is about, sort of like the nature and nurture. Like, was it that they had a bunch of smart people and that's why they were successful, or did the place enable the success? And I think, like any of these stories, the answer is unsatisfying, which is like it's a little bit of both, right? You do have people who come to join this company who other people in the story describe as geniuses, and not geniuses in the like colloquial, like, oh, they're really smart sense, but geniuses in the like, no, they do, they're just brains work differently. They're faster. They're more talented. You also have an environment that is created in the company where there's a fear of going bankrupt. The dot-com bubble's bursting. They have a successful product, but not really a sort of sense of how they're going to turn that into a successful business. And they have to do a lot to make that happen. So they're surrounded by very bright bulbs. I mean, these are just very, very bright people. They also are in an environment that directs that intellectual talent on very specific problems and just goes from problem to problem over the course of 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on the let me go back to the genius question. Who do people talk about? In this group of people who are all probably technical. They meet the technical definition of genius, which is like Mensa, which is like top 2% of IQ. They probably, everyone in the book probably, or almost everyone in your book meets that. Who do they talk about as sort of like really standing out when you talk to these people?
I mean, we'd occupy the whole podcast just talking about it. There's the obvious ones that are the household names, who are frequently referred to, but with that that label. There are others though. Max Levchin recruits a young engineer who later becomes a co-founder of Yelp. His name is Russ Simmons. And in my first discussion about it, Max said Russ is a genius level. He's a genius level outlier IQ. He can solve anything you want him to solve in half the time it would take someone else. Yeah. And he described this moment to me. He said, one time there was some this was a culture where puzzles were celebrated, like kind of like math puzzles and chess and logic problems. And I guess so they were standing around and someone had tossed out like a puzzle just casually in the air. And Russ had overheard it, turned around and said, oh, the answer to that is such and such. And Max was blown away because he thought it would take a little bit of time. So he asked Russ, I think I have the story right. He asked Russ, he said, you've heard that one before. That's how you knew the answer. And Russ said, no, it's just easy. You just do this and this, and that's how you find the answer. And I had story after story like this, where it was the way people described it was like almost a spooky level of that kind of intelligence, right? I also saw it vividly. One of my sources for this was Max, and Max has a photographic memory. I didn't necessarily believe that until he would say things, and then I would find a piece of paper like months later that sort of like chapter and verse had exactly what he had said. Peter is a chess grandmaster, like a national champion. He was one of the most talented players under 13 at one point. Elon is obviously Elon. I mean, there's a story about him having read every book in the library, and then when he ran out of books to read, he started to read the Encyclopedia Britannica. Yeah. I found actually in the buried archives of the Daily Pennsylvanian, this isn't in the book. This is like a random aside. Uh-huh. You know how when you graduate college, your parents can buy like an ad that just like congratulates you for graduating college?
Sure.
Mae Musk, Elon's mother, had lovingly purchased an advertisement in the Daily Pennsylvanian, or whatever it was called, the University of Pennsylvania student newspaper. And it's a little picture of Elon when he's like 6 or 7 years old. And congratulations, Elon. And it said something to the effect of like, you're the best. Thank you for being the best son and an encyclopedia. Right? Which is like a kind of amazing thing. On down the line, though, even the engineers who, let's say, came in as junior level or mid-level engineers, they were very sharp. And there was a line in the book that someone had relayed that Max had said to them, A's hire A's, B's hire C's, and so the first B you hire will take the whole company down, right? And I suspect he was exaggerating for intended effect, but it shows you a window into the very high bar for intellect at a place like this. It was, I would be lying if I said I wasn't intimidated during many of these interviews. These people can remember to this day, like specific graphs and math solutions to problems that they faced 20 years ago. I mean, this is definitely an outlier group.